Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and this is the next video wherein we are going to take a look on a new problem which is called as Pascal Triangle. So Pascal Triangle is basically a triangle of numbers. We need to understand what exactly it is, and basis on that we're going to be formulating this problem in Java language, and we're going to be writing the code for that so as to implement this in a proper way. So I won't be getting into so much of the mathematics, that what exactly it is and how it is formed and what's the purpose of having Pascal Triangle. We're just going to be understanding the logic first, and then we are simply just writing the code for that. So Pascal Triangle, like I mentioned, it's the triangle of numbers. So the logic is saying that it is having the same number of rows. It's having the same number of elements like as it is the row number. So you can see that the first row is basically having the one element, second row has two number of elements, third row has three number of elements. Well, the picture itself is self-explanatory what exactly the Pascal triangle is, and you just need to keep one thing in your mind, that the extreme left and the right element, the first and the last element of every single row is basically one, right? So the middle numbers are something which are getting changed, and you can see that how these are getting changed. So starting from the third row, you can see that it's the sum of just the elements just right above it. The 1 and 1 is giving us a 2, and in the fourth row you can see that the 3 is coming from the elements right above it, which is 1 and 2, and again the 3 is coming from the 2 and 1. Just like in the same way, it keeps on going for every single row, and that's how the Pascal triangle is formed. So you just need to understand these three things in your mind, and basis on that you can write the logic, and you can just implement this in any language that you want, and you can write your code. So yeah, like I mentioned, the three things which you need to keep in your mind: the first and the last element of every single row has to be 1. Number of elements, any single row is equals to the number of that particular row number. And like I mentioned, that understanding, okay, so this is the main point which you need to keep in your mind. So it is saying is that the nth index element sum. So the nth index element sum. So let's suppose we are working on the third row and the nth index. So basically this is the second index, right? The second element of the third row. It is saying the second element of third row is equal to the previous row nth index plus the n minus 1 element. So it is saying is that the second index element of the third row is equals to the second element of the second row plus the first element. Nth equals to nth plus n minus 1. Just like in the same way, you can see on the fourth row, the second element is going to be the sum of second element of the third row plus the second minus 1, the first element. Just like in the same way, the third is equals to the third of second row plus the second element. That's what it is saying. The nth equals to nth plus n minus 1 of the previous row. That's what we need to understand. So I hope the video up until this point, the video was clear. If you don't understand the logic, just watch the video once again, and it's just a simple thing. Well, the picture is itself telling its meaning, and it's self-explanatory. So if you have understood the logic, let's just go to the Eclipse screen, and there we're going to be writing the code. Alright, so now we have this class which is called as Pascal Triangle. Over here we need to just create the logic. So first of all, we need to take the input from the user, and basis on that we're going to be writing the number of rows in our Pascal Triangle. So scanner input equals to new scanner. So this is something which we need to write to take the input from the user. Alright, so now that we have just written this part, let's just import the library. This is done. Alright, so let's just print the simple message over here, that how many rows do we want? How many rows do you want? Alright, so this part is done, and next what we need to do, we need to store this thing, whatever the input that we're going to be taking from the user. So I'll just call it as rows, and I'll be initializing this as 0. So rows has to be something which needs to be passed for using this particular object which we have created through the input library, through the input object. And what we need to do this, so this is going to be the integer, right? So we need to do this part as well. So this is done, and now we have the number of rows that we want in the Pascal triangles. So what we need to understand next. So basically, in order to formulate this particular logic of the Pascal triangle, you need to keep this thing in your mind, that it needs to have some sort of a 2D array, because we are working on the rows and the columns of the numbers, right? And we need to store those elements inside a 2D array inside, because this is something, we need to store the elements, store the numbers. So we need to formulate some logic and we need to do some computations for that. So for that thing, we need to have some 2D array so as to keep an index of the row as well as the column. That is something which we require, because it's not going to be possible for a linear array. We cannot store just the numbers on the linear basis, because we need to work on the row basis. So that's the reason we need to have some sort of a 2D array. So for that thing, let's just create a 2D array over here, and for that thing, let's just define this. So all right, so new integer. So this is something we need to do. So that's how we define the 2D array, and we're going to be keeping the size of this array as 100 elements so as to have some good size of this, just have some good space so as to take the input from the user. I'm just keeping it as 100, just a random number. You can take any number you want. So for that, so now that this part is done, so let's just go to the main logic that we need to build. So in order to so now that we have just taken the input from the user as the rows, now the input is done. It's just the formulation that we need to do. So for that thing, we're going to be using the for loops, because while working on a 2D array, we basically do the operations using the for loops. This is something which we have done for many of the times. I hope you have worked on 2D arrays. So this is something which we need to do, and we need to work on the for loop for 2 times. This is something which we need to keep in our mind, because one for loop is basically working on the rows and the second for loop is going to be working for the columns. So let's try to build the logic for the rows, and then we're going to be going to the columns. So for that thing, let's just understand what we need to do in the rows. So we're going to be starting from the 0th location, like the very first row, right? And we need to work till it's going to be less than rows, and we need to keep on incrementing this particular part. This is something which is quite easy. So what exactly is the logic for the rows it is saying? So let's go to the logic once again. So for the rows, it is saying that first and the last element of a row has to be 1, and the number of elements in a row is equals to the row number. So we will go to the second point later. Let's understand the very first point, which it is saying. So the first and the last element of the row has to be 1. This is something which is the first point. So what it is saying, so I need to store my elements inside of this triangle array, right? So for that thing, let's try to understand what it is saying. The very first element, that means is whatever the row we are working on, and the element needs to be 0, right? The very first element has to be 1. Next thing it is saying is that also the last element of every single row has to be 1. This is something which we need to write initially, right? Because we are working on the rows as of now. That's the main part. This has to be 1. This is something which we have done easily, right? We just defining, because we don't want any kind of a change for the first and the last element. We just want to keep it as 1. That is something which we want to do. Next, whatever the logic which we need to build is basically for the middle elements. So that is something which we're going to be working on in this particular for loop. So, okay. So as of now, the part for the first and the last element is done. So we need to start for the elements, which is we're going to be working on the decrementing ways. So we're going to be starting from the second last element this time. So what I'm going to be doing as of now, I will be keeping it as starting from the I-1 location, because we're going to be working from the last position, because the last position has already been filled by 1. So I'm going to be starting from the last -1, which is I-1. Because every single row is basically having the I number of elements. I is basically the row number, and I is basically the number of elements that we want in a single row. So I will be starting from the second last element, and I will be working till it's going to be greater than 0, because I've already worked on the 0th element. So I don't want to do any kind of operation for the 0th element as well. So as I'm working on the decrementing way, so I'll be just keep on decrementing it, and that's how it's going to be working. Okay. So, okay, so it's saying I need to define. All right, so this is done. Now what we need to do, we just need to do the summation part, because understanding the point, the middle elements are basically filled basis upon the summation of the previous elements. So that is something which we need to do. So what I'm going to be doing over here is that I'm going to be keeping it as triangle. And okay, so this is my ith element, this is my jth element, and that needs to be done in such a way that the triangle. Okay, so let's just write this first, then I will explain this. Okay, so as you can see that I need to fill my ith and jth element, and how do I need to do? So whatever the row I'm working on, I need to work on the previous row. That is the main part, right? Like what we understand from the logic. So we need to take the numbers from the previous row, and how do we need to fill? So whatever the jth element I'm working on, I need to take the same element jth plus the j minus 1 is something which I also need to take. So that's how it's going to be, just adding the elements. So this is something which is done, and this is the main logic that we have to work on. So now that we have already filled the array with the elements that we want, next part comes is I need to print this particular array, right? So for that thing, I basically have, in order to write that particular triangle in a better way, I have already implemented a logic. So if you have already worked on patterns, then it's going to be easy for you to understand that logic. So pattern is something, that the star pattern that we write in different types of the patterns that we, just create using the for loops. So that is something which I have implemented already. So I won't be explaining you that part, but I will mention the code in the description box so that it's going to be easy for you to take the code from there. And I will be just copying that from some place, and I will just pasting that so as to print the Pascal triangle. But the main implementation about the Pascal triangle is this thing, which we need to understand based upon the logic that we have for the Pascal triangle. So what I'm going to be doing is that I'm just going to be quickly printing that for you so that we can just see the output over here. Well, the part which I'm copying from the source is basically just the printing part. It's not doing anything extra for the code. It's just printing the, it's just printing this Pascal triangle that we have written and nothing else. If you just want to understand the code, I will be just mentioning it over here in the description box, so you can take a look over there. So let's try to run this code and we will see what's the output we are getting. All right, so how many rows do you want? I need 5 rows for my Pascal triangle. So it is giving us the Pascal triangle. Yes, the very first is 1, the extreme elements are 1, the middle elements is 2, 3, whatever the number that we need. So yeah, that's pretty cool, right? So it's pretty simple. Let's try to run this once again and we will see the output. All right, so it's saying how many rows do you want? This time I need 7 rows, and yes, it's printing the message. It's printing the output as per the logic. The middle element is basically the sum of the elements right above it. 3, 4, 6, 5. Pretty cool, right? It's quite simple and impressive. Yeah, so that's basically it. That's it in this video, and I hope I was able to explain you the Pascal triangle logic in a better way. And if you like this video, just give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, just write in the comment box. I will definitely try to answer your questions, and I'll be mentioning the code as well as whatever the information in the description box so that you can have a look on it. All right, guys. So thanks for watching the video. Thank you for your time. See you next time.